Welcome to Chapter 4. This is the longest chapter in the book, and it should be because this is the broadest part of jazz history. This is jazz in America at its most popular, roughly 1930 to 1945. A lot of people call this the big band era, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Those were the most popular groups of the day. I prefer this term, the swing era, because that really gets down to the heart of what changed, and it's the rhythm. The rhythm changed. We begin to relax on the backside of the beat, and we begin to do what we call swing. We swing more. The Dixieland rhythm tends to be kind of, it's up on the front side of the beat. It's syncopated, but it's kind of syncopated on the front side of the beat. Swing relaxes that rhythm. They make it a very steady four in the bass. Boom, 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 with the drums. Banjo goes away, rhythm guitar, strum, 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 really straight four rhythm. It makes for a beautiful dancing style. The stride style piano players, bass chord, bass chord, bass chord, bass chord. You'll see that definition in just a minute in the book. And later they go to a more modern style, particularly Count Basie, but the rest of the rhythm section keeps that steady four groove, and fast, medium, slow, doesn't matter. It's this nice steady four groove that everybody can dance to. Another thing we kind of skipped over in Chapter 3 was Prohibition. Prohibition overlaps the Dixieland traditional jazz era and the beginnings of the swing era, and the speakeasies were really important to the birth and growth of swing music and this dancing style. People wanted to go out, people wanted to party, and they wanted to dance, and they wanted music to dance too, and that's where swing was born. Again, you'll see techniques listed here. You have the sweet bands, in particular the guy I mentioned with Bix Beiderbecke, Paul Whiteman. This was Bix's main job, was playing in this band. You'll see there's actually very little improvised jazz, just a few seconds of it right here. Then we get into stride style piano. The great James P. Johnson, often called the father of stride style piano, but like so many black artists, overlooked for other things that he did. I told you in Chapter 2, Scott Joplin really wanted to be taken seriously as a black classical composer. So did James P., and he actually had a little more success. You have an active link to something called Victory Stride. You've Got to Be Modernistic, absolutely fantastic stride-style piano piece. Here's a link to the Victory Stride right there. These time codes are just a little bit messed up, and I'm going to have to go in and get the publisher to fix those. I'm just seeing those for the first time in a while, and we need a little more space there, but it's all correct, just spacing's a little off. And then before we get into the individual artist, you've got this long article, Music as Tops to You and Me and Swing as a Part of It. This is by Duke Ellington. This was published in 1938. And the absolutely fascinating thing is Duke tells the story of the evolution of jazz from what we just went through in Chapter 2, in Chapter 3, and brings us right up to date. And it's fascinating just how accurate he was as a historian while he was living through, not just living through the middle of it, pioneering the new stuff that was happening in the 30s and 40s. So this is a little bit of a long article, but it's absolutely worth it. This is his group, the Washingtonians. They played at the Kentucky Club in the 1920s in New York City. This band grew rapidly from the smaller group, almost a Dixieland kind of setup you see here, to more and more members until you get to a much larger band, typical of 5 saxes, 4 trumpets, 4 trombones. Takes Duke a while to get there, but he fronts a much bigger band for the rest of his career. You've got some nice ad pieces here. This is from his Carnegie Hall concert. I love this one. I'm sorry, that's a different concert. This is from his Carnegie Hall concert, and this is later. This is in the 1940s and 50s that he played a series of concerts at Carnegie Hall. This one was really special, though. This is a who's who of players in his band at the time, but right here, this guy, Django Reinhardt. You'll meet him toward the end of Chapter 4. Gypsy jazz guitarist, kind of viewed universally as the first important European jazz musician, somebody who pioneered, who really brought something new to jazz. This was Django's first public appearance in America, and Duke's the one that brought him here, which is pretty cool. After you get through that, we start right at the beginning. Again, we mentioned this in Chapter 3, Fletcher Henderson. It's this guy right here. He's the piano player, but more important, the arranger and composer for the band a lot of times. Don Redman, one of the saxophone players, also did a lot of the great arranging. But the thing that made this band special was it was a sweet band. It was kind of a society band. Fletcher wanted to do more hot stuff. The guys in New York weren't quite there yet. So they sent for this guy, Louis Armstrong. Louis left King Oliver's band, came and joined this band. This is Coleman Hawkins, early pioneer of great jazz saxophone playing. And all of these guys learned to swing like Louis swung. improvised like Lewis improvised, and it changed the face of jazz forever. Gary Giddens, this great jazz historian, you'll read some of his stuff later on. You'll see some quotes from him in the book. Has the greatest quote of all time. He said the whole swing era, it's orchestrated Lewis. I love that. Taking Lewis's style and writing it out for a bigger band to play, but still leaving lots of space for open improvisation. After Fletcher, if I can talk about one big band, it's got to be Duke Ellington. I mentioned the Kentucky Club. It was just right off of this street right here. It's just outside the picture down that side street there. And of course, later on, he went into the Cotton Club. One of the things that make Duke bands so special are the players in his band. People like Cootie Williams, Johnny Hodges had such unique sounds and approaches that Duke's band sounded like no other. And Duke wrote specifically for these guys, not just in solo charts, not just in feature charts, but in little ensemble licks and just simple little passing things. The nuance in Duke's writing, really incredible. You've got a beautiful example, a tune called Prelude to a Kiss. That features Johnny Hodges. Get that sound in your head. You'll recognize Duke's band because you can always hear Johnny Hodges' sound simmering over the top. Here's a wonderful picture of the whole band. Again, Cootie Williams, the great Tricky Sam Nanton on trombone, kind of like Cootie but on trombone. Again, here's Johnny Hodges over here. Harry Carney, beautiful Barry sax player. Dark, rich sound. You have a tune called Main Stem that really shows you the dance style, but again features the brilliant improvisation of so many of these guys in this picture. After Duke, you got Count Benny Goodman. I'll get to Count Basie in a second. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of my story. Benny Goodman, first jazz concert in Carnegie Hall. First really important public band to break the color barrier. It's a very different style. In fact, in a lot of ways, Duke's band is so unique. This is a more kind of typical approach to big band, which is to build a group of sidemen and feature one artist. And everybody in Benny's band could play. They were great players, but the playing always centered around him. Now, this is a little bit later. Cootie had actually left Duke, joined Benny's band for a while. That's Cootie Williams right there. And then not long after this picture, he left, formed his own band. We mentioned Fletcher Henderson. Fletcher wrote charts for Benny's band and at times was also a member of the band. Sometimes he was just writing charts. Sometimes he was actually playing piano in the band. He wrote charts for a number of other really important big bands as well. So, pretty cool guy. Like I said, the first jazz concert ever in Carnegie Hall. Here's the actual review from the New York Times the day after it happened. You have a copy of the program, and this article right here is the liner notes from the 1950s when the album was released. They recorded this at a time when you couldn't put out anything but a 78 record, a 78 RPM record. 33 1/3 long play vinyl didn't come along till much later. This was recorded to wire tape, an early primitive recording style. They remastered it and they put it out, and these are the liner notes that tell a much more honest version of the story. This is kind of, well, it's Olin Downs, and he was a classical reviewer for the New York Times, but he wanted to be hip and he just wasn't. And you get that sense in his writing. That's worth reading. It's pretty fascinating. Benny, like I said, also fronted small groups, the original Benny Goodman Quartet, and then much later the Benny Goodman Sextet. In particular, this dude right here, Charlie Christian. That's an amplifier. This is the first really important electric guitar player. And of course, he pioneers much in the jazz world, but he's also an influence on name a rock and roll, name a country artist, name a guitar player who plays electric guitar. All of them point back to this guy, to Charlie Christian. Jimi Hendrix, Eddie Van Halen, Steve Vai, name one. They all talk about this guy right here. So pretty important part of history right there. Then the Count Basie Band. Basie's band was Kansas City. They were a little more wide open, a little more blues oriented, but this rhythm section was super rock solid, playing that straight four I was talking about. So much so that Count Basie began to break away from that straight four rhythm, and he played a more modern piano style called comping. You'll hear it on several of the recordings that are examples here. You've got a ton of great dig deepers here. The Institute of Jazz Studies, a good friend of mine, Ted Hirschhorn, is the archivist at the Institute of Jazz Studies, and he's done a few amazing pages, some with his own photographs. You'll see some of his photographs later in the book. And that's a great website. Spend some time there. Here's the 920 special with the band and featuring guest soloist Coleman Hawkins, which is pretty cool. This is a nice piece, again, if you're at NMSU or you're at UTEP using the book. This is by a guy named Gene Wilson in El Paso, Texas. This was actually published in the El Paso Herald-Post, the old afternoon paper that has now closed. But this was done for a visit that Basie made to the city of El Paso. And it's all pointillism. Everything's dots except for his hat. If you look carefully in his hat, it's the names of players, it's the names of tunes and albums that made Count Basie famous, which I think is really cool. Gene Kay was an amazing jazz fan, and I'm so proud the family let us publish this in the book. Pretty cool. There's Lester Young, great saxophone player. You can read all about him. And here Lester leaps in. Again, you'll hear that more modern comping style. The great Freddie Green, greatest rhythm guitarist of all time. And then you've got a tune for a little bit later on. A lot of the big bands broke up in 1945. Duke's band, Count Basie's band, some of the few to actually stay together and be successful in the 50s and 60s and beyond. Duke's band went on and did a lot of very adventurous, big type concerts. You'll see things that he did that bridge classical music and jazz. Count Basie's band was a little different. When they kind of reformed in the 50s, they were an important band on their own, but they were a very important band as accompanist for singers. Basie had his own singer, Joe Williams. He worked with Ella Fitzgerald. He worked with Frank Sinatra. And they backed up a lot of the best singers of the 50s and 60s. So the Basie band continued to be important for a long time to come. Jimmy Lunsford, one of the most overlooked bands of the day. I love this piece of ad copy. I just think that's so cool. From the 1940s, Glenn Miller. Glenn Miller's tune, In the Mood. You've got a listening guide for it. Arguably the most famous tune of the entire swing era. And then we get to some small group swing. Like I said, and you saw the Kansas City Seven and the Benny Goodman's quartet. There were small groups swinging out of those big groups, but there were artists who focused on small group swing. One of the greatest was this man right here, Thomas Fats Waller. This is on the street in Juarez. So again, if you're at New Mexico State, that sign was there the last time I was in Juarez, but it's been a few years since I've been across the bridge. So I don't know if it's still there or not. Here's his small group recording. You've got a great listening guide for the tune, Your Feet's Too Big. Coleman Hawkins, again, you've seen him a couple of times already in this chapter, but he's really important for fronting smaller groups, particularly later on. And of course, he broadens his musical horizons and branches into more modern styles of jazz the further we go in jazz history. Django Reinhardt, I mentioned at the front of this introduction. Here he is. Here's his section on him. And you have a great tune called Minor Swing. Swing Manure, the Minor Swing. It's a pretty cool piece. I'm a huge Django Reinhardt fan. You've got some nice links here for Django as well. Ella Fitzgerald, one of the great singers of the day, fronting Chick Webb's band. This was after Chick died. That's not Chick Webb there playing drums. That's the guy that replaced him. Ella began to front the band, though, and is a very important singer. You have one of their novelty hits, Tisket a Tasket, but you'll meet Ella again in Chapter 5 and hear some more mature material from her. You've got a great section called Personal Memories. This comes from a book by Joe Smith where he just did oral histories and she tells some great stories. I mentioned Tad Hirschhorn. Here's a picture of Basie performing with Ella much later in their careers. I love that photograph. Tommy Dorsey, Frank Sinatra. As much as Frank is a really important singer, in some ways this is the beginning of the downfall of the big bands. Most of these singers would sing a tune or two on a set, and as Sinatra became more famous, he was pushing Dorsey and the audience was pushing Dorsey to let Frank sing more. It caused a lot of controversy. Again, you've got a personal memory coming up by this woman, Jo Stafford. She tells the unvarnished story, which is pretty cool. And promoters figured out, hey, we can hire Frank. We can pay him a lot more. We can hire local musicians, pay them a lot less. And a lot of the big bands began to break up because there just wasn't as much work. The focus was on the solo singers and, more importantly, World War II ended. And when the war ended in 1945, people stopped going out as much. It caused some financial hardships for the bands, and music began to change. The vocalist became more important. Great Bill Gottlieb photo of Sinatra there. Here's Jo Stafford, great photograph of her, and this is that Personal Memories I was talking about. And we end up with two more great singers, the great Cab Calloway. So much fun. Such an amazing artist. Great band leader, too. And Billie Holiday. Billie Holiday is an artist who transcends time, who transcends style, but she is absolutely critical right here in the swing era. Even though she continues to perform into the 1950s, she's basically performing modified versions of swing music. And you have an early recording of hers that's just gorgeous. It's Hoagy Carmichael's Georgia on My Mind. Now, that's a lot, I know, but it's a big chapter. You've got 2 weeks to take it in. Enjoy.